What would you tell yourself based on what you know now, going back in time if you could, what would you tell yourself, whether it's advice on, hey, don't take things so seriously, whatever it is,
Yeah.
just curious from your perspective, knowing what you know now, what you tell your younger self.
Yeah. So, I mean, the first, which is a short and kind of an easy one to say, but it's hard to internalize, which is, again, sales is where you get your financial needs met, not your emotional needs. So don't
Hmm.
take it personally. None of the people you're selling to, they've, got different agendas. They'll say things to that may or may not be true. They, may be leading you down paths you don't, expect, or, shining you on. There's a lot of that. So don't take any of that, personally, that's something that you've got to train yourself emotionally to do. But while you're at that, but still be able to maintain empathy, compassion, and understanding for, your client, and not, turn into, this kind of cold automaton who is devoid of any emotion, because people don't want that either in the sales process. I'd say the other big thing that's super important, and I've seen very few, almost not, probably I could count them on one hand, of people that actually learn a sales process and actually follow it. When I learned a sales process years and years and years ago, I worked at a couple of companies that I would ask, so what's our sales process? What do we do? And I did not get any two salespeople to give me the same answer. You can't run an organization that way. You can't run a sales organization that way. Another personal mistake I had is I didn't force a process on, the salespeople that I had at the time. If you don't have a process, you can't measure it, you can't improve it. I don't care what the process is. I'm not an expert on any of these processes, but find one, learn it, master it, and, be, devout towards that process. Because if you don't have a process, you can't give feedback up your chain of command to how the sales process is going. Your chain of command has no idea how to even ask you, how's the sale, how's this sale going? Right? Because you can't talk about it in terms of like I said, the Sandler process is the one that I use. And, it's like, okay, well, we're doing bonding and building rapport this week. I set these upfront contracts with the customer. We clarified budget. We were really clear about that. Still working with the, some of the gatekeepers on paying. And here's where we're at. And, then they can say, okay, well, when are we, then the higher ups can say, okay, where are we on, fulfillment? When are we going to fulfill? Everybody wants to know when the fulfillment's going to take place. And you can say, I've got these things to do in these steps of the process, and everybody can measure it. And I think a lot of salespeople get fired because the upper management doesn't have a process. They have no idea how to measure what is going on. And then you have a salesperson that doesn't use a process. You have a management team that doesn't understand or how to manage to that process. So deals don't get closed. Tons of money gets wasted, and you end up not selling anything. And what you end up doing is you just end up hiring the next person who sounds like they have a really good LinkedIn channel, Rolodex, and they're just going to go and call all the people that they know and tell them about the new software. And it's not sustainable. And that salesperson is only going to last about 2 years. They may make a couple of sales, then they'll be gone. I mean, Nate, how many salespeople do we know that have worked at 15 companies? That's not an exaggeration. That's 15 and that's an average number, right? Some of them, they've worked 20, 25 companies. They go one company a year.
Yeah.
They make a sale, they run through their Rolodex, and that is bad process or no process. And that's what I would absolutely tell my younger self. Learn a sales process. There's enough good ones out there, and stick to it. And especially the upper management. And shame on you if you're upper management, you're watching this and you can't clearly articulate the steps of your process, and you cannot clearly articulate to your sales team your expectations around that process. Because how are they supposed to know what they're supposed to do? How are they supposed to know? How are they supposed to know, what you expect? Of course you expect a deal to close. Every sales manager expects deals to close. How do you get there? What are the steps? Can you tell them to that person, and does everybody in your organization know what those steps are? If they don't, stop, pull everybody out of the field, sit them down for 3 or 4 days, and let's get that hammered out. Because if you don't, you're just going to burn through people. You're going to burn through a lot more money, and eventually they'll burn through you too. because if you're an upper management sales rep, a sales exec or sales manager, you're not going to be long for that company anyway. It's more small, medium business. The larger mega corporations, they can get away with not having a process because everybody, the Super Bowl ad or everybody, you've already got, everybody's Rolodex and so forth. But certainly if you're a small, medium business, you've got to have a process.
I wish everybody gave it as much thought as you did, because that's a really terrific answer. So I've got to ask, what's the biggest lesson you've learned in the last couple of years?
I think what I have learned is that the dynamics between the small businesses and the medium and large businesses, it really is a completely different world. Obviously, everybody wants to get to, the C and V level in every corporation, but in the small business, you get to them usually on the first call, which is great. Also in the small business, obviously the deals are smaller, the margins are actually about the same, but you have to do more of these deals. But I also think that the process works better in smaller organizations and smaller companies. So I think to that extent is, don't ignore, everybody wants to do the big deals with the big companies and get the big paychecks, but your company should have a small business offering as well. Figure out, how do you engage the thousands and thousands or tens of thousands of hundreds of thousands of businesses out there that could potentially benefit from whatever it is you're offering. And that's something that a lot of my channel partners really didn't have. Nate, when you and I worked together, the software company you worked at, the other software company, they didn't know, they didn't care, they didn't want a small business offering. It was too much work, it was too hard.
Right.
But you can work a process in sales with small business much more easily than you can in a large, right? Because a process isn't the be all and end all. You can execute the process perfectly, and you read the newspaper tomorrow and you hear about the acquisition that nobody talked about, and then you got to start over if they let you start over. Yeah. Or you hear that the CEO, was brought up on charges and then everything's shut down, or they declare bankruptcy. And, you didn't know, and then everything's shut down. Or they reorg for the 10th time, and the people you talk to who were the decision makers aren't anymore. But in small businesses, that really doesn't happen. You're talking to the CEO, you're talking to, the VP or whatever. Those people are who they say they are. They're going to stay in those jobs, and they usually will make those decisions, and the sales cycle's way quicker. Yeah, you don't make as much money, but they're way cheaper to sell to. And that's what I think that I've learned recently in the last couple of years.
Great. I love it. I know a lot of people are going to find that helpful.
Yeah.
I hope so.
There's some good points you made there, Chris, and I wanted to point out a couple things. So you mentioned Rolodex. For any of the kids out there listening today, the Rolodex is, just so you don't have to Google it, it was a little, like a little plastic thing. They had little paper cards in it with, A to Z. And it's back when we physically would go out everywhere. You get a business card, and you tape it in that,
That's right.
And you know what I mean?
Yeah, we're men of a certain age on this call for sure. I definitely showed some of my age.
Say we're experienced, Chris.
We're experienced. Yeah.
And I have to laugh because I remember years ago when I would be at a sales job and I'm like, all right, it's time to find something else. And I would look for the next gig. I would talk to recruiters and they'd be like, well, this company wants you to bring your Rolodex. And that was a huge red flag, because if you have to call your Rolodex of contacts to sell something, it's a crappy product, right? And that's the one thing I'll say too. Salespeople can sniff out crappy stuff like that very, very quickly, because you got to sell it. If they're telling you, hey, we want you to work your whole network to get business. Now, in some cases that works, right? With what you and I did, that's what I did, right? It was calling all contacts, but that's different because it's more of a startup type thing. But when you're talking to a company where they already have a sales team and they're trying to, expand the business and grow like crazy, like you were talking about, if they're asking for your Rolodex of people, it's usually, I wouldn't say always, but usually it's a red flag, at least to me, because that means you're going to be selling something that ain't really that great and is hard to sell. We talked about the smaller opportunities. We used to call them like pots and pans.
Yeah.
You're a shorter cook. One of my mentors, Eric Sorensen, it was his name. He would say, Teske, you're like a shorter cook. You make bacon over here, and you got some ham, and then you got some eggs over here. You got a lot of things going. And that's when you're building your pipeline. You got a lot. You got multiple sales cycles going. And it was interesting because yesterday, one of the guests that we interviewed was one of my old clients. He had made a comment where he was reaching out to his network because he was the ambassador, and he got a hold of somebody, and she's like, "Hey, nothing going now, but we'll stay in touch." Well, shortly thereafter, she reached out and said, "Hey, we have an opportunity. Let's engage." Well, the
Yeah.
rep that was assigned to that deal was working a monster deal. So
Yeah.
as I would do, right? You kind of put that one on the back burner, but you don't blow it off altogether. Fast forward, they ended up losing the opportunity. It was a real small entree deal, but it was a land and expand deal. And that deal, I forgot the numbers, but it was in the millions that they lost because they didn't work it correctly on the front end. Because
Yeah.
sometimes, those smaller deals, you have to do them, right? Because give that customer as much attention as they need to a degree, right? If you're working a monster deal, I totally get it. You got to get that big deal done, but work the other one around it, right? Because you're going to get to a point in that deal where it's kind of the sales stall, so to speak. Like when you're smoking a brisket, all of a sudden you get to, and they call it the stall, where for a period of time nothing happens with that meat. Same with a deal.
Yeah.
It's into kind of the quiet zone, and then you start freaking out, like, oh crap, they're not talking to us. What's going to happen? But the point being, you got to work those pots and pans deals too, because you got to continue to build not only your pipeline but get those deals. And it could be a deal that you initially get that all of a sudden, because you do a good job, you take care of the customer, it becomes a very large opportunity. And the last one I wanted to mention, you talked about merger and acquisition. This was a guy I used to work with years ago. I think this happened when he was at PeopleSoft. He was working a very large opportunity and went through the whole sales cycle, got to the very end, talked to his buyer on a Friday, and he said, "Hey, Bob, we're ready to go, but we can't sign until Monday. I'm talking with the leadership team." This is on a Friday. He said, "I'm meeting with the leadership team tomorrow. We're going to review everything, but we're going to sign on Monday." As he's telling me the story, I'm like, oh, I know where this is going.
Weehoo.
Over the weekend, an announcement came out that company was merging with somebody else. I called him on Monday. He's like, "Sorry, man, we got this on hold." And then nothing happened. So it brings me back to another point where when I was much younger, my very first sales job at ADP, I was working deals, and kind of the Cliff Note version is the customer's like, "Hey, Nate, we're ready to sign your contracts." And this is back in the old days when you had to actually physically go out and get a paper contract signed. And I told my VP, he's like, "Hey, what's going on with that deal?" I'm like, "Hey, the guy's ready to go. I'm going to go out there tomorrow and sign it." Or he's going to sign it. And he goes, "Nate, get in your car right now and go there and get it signed." And I'm like, "Why?" He goes, "What if the guy dies overnight?" I'm like, "Okay, well, good point." So got it signed. But the point being, when you're going through those deals, nothing happens until a sale is made, right? Customers ready to go. You work on their timeline, get it signed, get it completed, and then then it's all goodness and light. But don't leave anything to chance, because there's one of the VPs I had years ago called it like the velocity of the deal, I think. And when you're in sales cycle, you kind of start rolling. You built that trust, as you talked about, Chris, which is key. You get that deal going, you're shucking and jiving, you're working through the process. And all of a sudden, you're like doing calls at like 8 o'clock at night with your team. Right? Hey, but you got to do that, right? Sales is not a 9 to 5 job.
No,
It's just not.
No, the pillars that I also adhere to along with the process in every sale has trust, need, help, and hurry. And you need to have all of those throughout the process. And hurry is essential. Changes happen, distraction happens. Competitors are injecting, their FUD or whatever. Newsflash, and none of them play fair. So like you said, the hurry part is real. Again, you also have to keep that bond and build rapport. So, I remember another story of a sales rep telling me that this person needed to call the CEO on Christmas Day in order to get something signed. Don't do that. Please don't do that if you're out there listening. But the point of hurry is, it's real. You've got to push all the way through as quickly as you can before anything can possibly change. And it will change.
I would add to that, it needs to be from the customer's point of view. I did a ride along with a guy, and when he was going to say that, I would have stopped him, but he walked in. We were not even sitting down when he looked at the prospect and said, "My boss wants us to get this deal closed before the end of the year." Because we got in the car. I said, "Who was that about?" He goes, "That was about me." And I said, "Yeah, and who should it have been about?" He's like, "The customer." I go, "Exactly."
Yeah.
Don't say that, kids.
Yep. Financial needs, emotional needs, I get it. You don't want to lose your job, but your customer does not care about you.
Yeah.
So,
That's a great point you bring up, Rob. There's I can't remember the individual, but he was a coach of the Giants years ago, and it was his first time being a head coach. Let me clarify, the New York Giants football team, first year coach, and he was working through stuff, and he's like, man, he goes, we're not winning games. He was kind of freaking out. I'm gonna get fired, this and that. So he called the guy Al Davis, I think, the Oakland Raiders way back years ago. He calls him up. He's like, Al, what do you think? And his response was beautiful. He said, hey, nobody cares. Work harder. That was his. And it's funny because I was talking to my son the other day about something, and I forgot even what it was about. But he's like, hey, Dad, nobody cares. Work harder. I'm like, good point. That's what I said for once. That's true, right? I mean, it's your needs should not be visible in that engagement.
Right.
You got to make it about the customer. How are you going to solve their problem? If you can articulate how your solution solves that problem, then that's Valhalla in sales. If you can't, it's really, really difficult because they don't care about your quota, right? And the other thing too is when you tell it, like when that sales rep told the guy, hey, we got to get this done by end of year, the first thing that goes into that guy's head, which would go into my head, I ain't signing this sucker until 5 o'clock on New Year's Eve, right? Because I know this guy just said he told me what his goal is. And in some cases, right, I mean, the clients have been trained, and this is at fault of the software sales world, which I was a part of for a very long time. Salespeople have done a great job of training customers to buy at the end of the quarter or at the end of the fiscal year.
Yeah.
I mean, customers know it, right? If there's going to be any concession given, it's then.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, don't give the customer any more negotiating power than they already have.
That's right. That's right. So one last question I have, Chris, looking back on your career, is there anything that you would have done differently or changed as far as your path or what you did with, starting your business? And it could be more than one thing, right? But I'm just curious, your lens in the career you've had, you've been the CEO literally of your company for 20 years now. What would you have done differently in looking back as it relates to your career?
Yeah, I think I think I would have done a couple of things differently. Obviously, when I got to a point where I was big enough and our company was big enough to start acquiring the sales components, the top of the funnel was far more important. I mean, we had somebody who could do the middle and the bottom, and that's, you're looking at them. But the top of the funnel would have been the most important thing for a small business, especially. It is super, super hard. The difference between the big companies and the small ones, revenue and size and so forth. The big ones don't have to make calls. Everybody knows who they are. They show up at the big conferences and, they don't have inside sales. They have a marketing funnel. They have a marketing team. And that's how, they get the top of their funnel filled. They don't get it filled through the guerrilla warfare that the smaller companies do. And that is the hardest thing, is to continually fill the top of your funnel in sales. And that's something I definitely learned and would have, and not even at the beginning of the company, not even then, but even when I worked for other people, is they made the same mistake. They would hire the junior so-and-so. They didn't work out after 6 months. They fired them. They hired salespeople who basically called people in their channel and so forth. Or, they relied on the pipeline. They relied on the channel partners. But the channel partners, after a while, why would they bring you in? If you're somebody who can, you can't bring me any leads, why would I bring you a lead? So really getting people that are good at getting on the phone and getting to the right people, it is super hard to do. You need a senior resource, and that person needs to be good, preferably somebody that's done outside sales, because they know the right people. They know who to talk to. They know what they care about, versus somebody that's never gone all the way through a sales process. They just don't know how to talk. They don't know how to get past, hi, hello, my name is, do you have a second? They just don't know how to do that. So that is a big thing that I would have done differently, is really concentrated on getting top of the funnel talent to engage first, versus focusing on the middle and the bottom. I think the other when I was working at other companies and so forth was, I wish I had learned a sales process ahead of time, because I did a lot of pre-sales, and I'm a technical person by nature. I build software, integration work. I do I spent a lot of time in the services part of it, and I did the pre-sales. But I would also have learned a sales process ahead of time, because I'll tell you, like you said, Nate, you're part of that team. And as a sales exec, you're getting people. And when you are the pre-sales engineer, you're the pre-sales person, there's nothing more exhausting and frustrating than a salesperson who is struggling. Because when they start struggling and they're not making their quota, what do? They set up every meeting under the sun. They try and get their activity going, right? They want to tell the boss, look at all this stuff I got going on, and none of it's real. And as a pre-sales person, you can go, well, wait a minute, hold on a second. I just sat in that call. This person said they had no money. This person said, this person doesn't understand like how the deal is even going to get done on their side. It sounds like before we go out there and I spend a week, working until 2 a.m. every single day, getting this thing stood up to prove a concept, we don't even know if this is going to result in a sale. So I wish I had kind of learned that like day one before, and it would have informed a lot of other decisions about like the kind of companies I would have joined and the roles I would have taken and the things I would have signed up for. So those are the two things.
That's a really good point too, because just a quick thing on the sales process. As somebody who's done sales training and led those workshops for like 18 years, I continue to be shocked by the number of companies that I go into, big companies that you would have heard of. And I'm talking to reps who've been doing it for 30 years and have maybe had one sales training. Many cases, they've never had any.
Right.
To your point,
right.
There's no process they're following, which is why, one of the things, for people listening, I think if you're in that camp, I'd encourage you to call us, because one of the things we're thinking about doing is putting together some training on that where individuals can come. You don't have to worry about your company, but we'll give you a process, a repeatable thing that you can do, and you'll at least not be flying in the dark, which is not a good place to be.
If you can't measure it, you can't improve it. And a process will help you measure.
I love that.
If
I
else,
agree
it'll help you
with what you said earlier. Yeah, if you don't have a process, you can't monitor it, you can't improve it.
Right.
It's a chapter quote.
Mm-hmm.
For sure. And one thing you mentioned a few times, Chris, is qualification, right? You have to qualify and qualify often. It's kind of like voting in Chicago, right? Vote early and often, qualify early.
Yes.
You really have to do that. And the other thing too about like the pre-sales business development, the job is to get the appointment. Mm-hmm. That's it, right? That's the sole job or the sole goal. You're not selling on that first call, right? Hey, this is what it does. You'd like to learn more about it? Let's schedule a call with Nate. We can talk more about it, see if it's a fit, right? We may not be a fit, but this is what we do. If you're interested, let's have a conversation. But building pipeline, every sales job, that is the number one thing you have to do. And you have to have like 4 to 5 extra quota in that pipeline. And sometimes there was a guy I worked with years ago, and the guy was a bit of a ding-dong, real arrogant, for lack of a better term. But he had one solid point. He's like, look, if you don't have anything, just say, I got nothing, right? I got nothing in the pipeline right now that's real. But here's what I'm doing, because I have a ton of time. I'm doing this, building up pipeline, working with my network, et cetera. So, you're most often, brutal honesty is the best policy, right?
Yep.
There's a thing called a QBR, which is a quarterly business review. And you got to do them every quarter. And you talk about your deals that you have that you're working for that quarter that are still in flight. And it sucks because everyone says the same thing. Oh, we're doing this, that. And you're looking at it. And if it's not you, like some of my peers, well, we're working with so-and-so, and, this is where they're at. I'm thinking, there's no way on earth this deal's closing. I can smell the bull crap. I know full well the VP of sales who's on the call sees through it, right?
Yeah.
If you got nothing, just say you got nothing, right? Or you say, these deals, I think you're going to close this quarter. Because all it does is waste a ton of time for everybody involved. And it's not good to do that. So talk about what you think is going to happen. And back to that qualification, qualify them out early if you can, right? It's not easy to do because you get invested. This is the hardest thing, in my opinion, in sales. You get invested, you're going through that sales cycle with the customer and you're feeling good and it's going. And all of a sudden you kind of get a gut feel like, shit, this ain't going to happen. But all that time invested, we're going to keep pushing through to the point that I tried to kill deals earlier and the management was like, no way, these guys are going to close. And I'm like, oh man, now I'm in a pickle because my gut management wants to keep banging on it. And it's like, well, at what point do we pull the plug? And those, there's ways to kind of navigate that where you can push it to a head real quick.
Yep.
Sometimes you get in those deals and you just don't think it's going to win, but you're so invested in it that you just keep pushing through. And it's a balance,
Yeah.
right? You don't want to walk
Yeah.
away from people
Yeah.
that may happen, but at the same time, if your gut's telling you it ain't going to happen, don't spin your wheels. It's not worth
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
So Chris, thank you so much for taking time to speak with us today.
Yeah.
Hour goes
Of
by really
course.
quickly. And I really like the things you talked about with us today. We're hearing a common theme. Trust is so huge in
It
every
is.
cycle, and that's
Yeah.
that should be kind of your baseline when you work an opportunity is build that level of trust early. You have to earn it. Obviously, they're not going to just
Yeah.
trust you at the gate. Because if you have sales in your title, they're immediately like this on guard. So you got to break through that and work through that piece. But yeah, Rob, I don't know if you have any other thoughts. I thought it was a great discussion
Yeah,
with
I
Chris.
loved it. Apart from the quote that I already mentioned, I love that idea of sales is where you get your financial needs met, not your emotional needs or your personal needs. I don't remember how
Right.
That was
you do it.
beautiful.
Yeah, it's so perfect.
Stuck
Yeah,
with me.
yeah, Chris, thank you so much. This is really a fun
You're welcome.
conversation, and I hope
I appreciate
people.
you having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. And everybody, take to heart what Chris said because there's a lot of gold in this one when you really listen. And that whole idea of you better have a process and you better be
Yeah.
monitoring that process, absolutely huge. So if you like what you heard, I encourage you to hit that like button, subscribe. It's all free to do. There's going to be lots more guests coming up. If you've got questions for our guests or questions or ideas of upcoming guests, put it in the comments, get in touch with us. This is an ongoing feature, and we look forward to bringing you more great content. So on behalf of Sales Stories with Nate Teske, I'm your co-host, Rob Sullivan. Tune in next time.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for having me.